Hello, welcome, Matt here. I have a very special guest for you today, so let's get straight into it. So as my Leica M6 is still on the table from the last video, comparing it to the Voigtlander Bessa R4M, I posed the question to you, how amazing would it be to have a medium format Leica film camera? For any of you that love rangefinders the same as me, how nice would it be to have kind of double the resolution of your Leica camera in a similar format? Has anybody got any guesses on what today's video is on, other than by reading the title, which is always a massive spoiler? Yes, correct. I feel we need a drum roll, but today we are talking about the absolutely amazing Hasselblad Xpan. This is a camera I've been meaning to review for you guys for pretty much since I started YouTube. It's been on the list and then I keep getting distracted by other cameras. So let me just give you a quick pan round of the camera. No pun intended. And yes, this is the almost cult-like Hasselblad Xpan. So I guess first things first, if you don't normally shoot with film cameras, let me give you a bit of background on this amazing camera. The Hasselblad Xpan 1 was first released in 1998, followed by the Hasselblad Xpan 2 in 2003. This was a collaboration between Fujifilm and Hasselblad, to the point where Fuji made it and Hasselblad stuck their badge on it. So the Fuji equivalent is called the Fuji TX-1 and the Fuji TX-2. They've got a slightly different paint design, but underneath it's pretty much the same camera made by Fuji. The body's made by Fuji and the lenses are made by Fuji. I guess you could kind of think of it the same as the collaboration between Fujifilm and Zeiss when they made the Fuji GF670 folding camera. I promise that camera will come. It's on my list and it's getting closer to the top as I'm ticking them off. So Fujifilm GF670, this is an amazing folding medium format camera. And if you're not yet subscribed, now's a great time to subscribe because that camera will come hopefully in February. I'll try. But back to the amazing Hasselblad Xpan. The Xpan came with 3 different lenses. It came with the 45 f4, which is the lens on the camera at the moment. And I'll just use this lens as an example, but someone commented, I think, on one of my YouTube videos in the past, are Hasselblad lenses made as nice as Leica lenses, for example? And I'd say absolutely. I'd say optically they're as good as Leica lenses from my experience, and build quality they're as nice as Leica lenses. So if we just look at the 45 as an example, you have nice half stop aperture clicks. It's a nice smooth focus throw, and the 45 and the 90 focus down to 0.7 meters. And with the Xpan being a rangefinder camera, the rangefinder coupling therefore goes down to 0.7 meters. Just as a lens comparison, here's the 90mm. So the 90 is larger than the 45, and it still has a warming filter on from when I last used this lens, probably shooting cine still or movie film. Both of these lenses have a 49mm filter thread. As I say, the 90 is also really nicely made. Now, depending on how you use this camera, you could use it as a 45mm and a 90mm if shooting in standard format, or if you're shooting in panoramic format, it's closer to probably 30mm and 50mm. I'll come on to that in a second. Just for completeness, there is also a 30mm 5.6 lens, which is equivalent to about 17mm. That was always the most expensive lens of the set, so I don't have that lens, but it is very highly regarded if you are a super wide angle type shooter. So what do I mean by saying use it in standard format or panoramic format? This is a very, very special camera. This is called a dual format camera. And if I show you on the back, there's a little switch here on the back. And what it does is it changes the viewfinder mask from a standard 35mm, which is basically your 24 by 35mm frame like you get out of, I don't know, the M6 or any other 35mm film camera. Or you can shoot it in panoramic mode, which is 24mm times 65mm. So that's basically stitching 2 frames together. What that effectively gives you is a 6x7 35mm film camera. So if you can kind of picture film, if that's your 6x7 negative, this is the approximate width of a 6x7 negative, but it's the height of a 35mm strip of film. So if you shoot 6x7 cameras and then end up cropping the top and the bottom, this camera could be for you. I have already done a review of the panoramic adapter for my Mamiya 7 camera. That allows me to load 35mm into my 6x7 camera, which effectively gives me the same output as the Xpan. The main difference with the Xpan is, one beauty of the setup is you can change your format. So say I'm shooting portraits, and I know what you're thinking, the Hasselblad Xpan is not a portrait camera. But being a portrait photographer, I have obviously used this for portraits as well. So for argument's sake, I'll shoot, say, the first 3 frames as standard 35mm crop. And then just as a general example, I go walking in the mountains. I can then shoot panoramic frames for the next 10 photos. And then I meet a person in the mountain and I want to take their portrait. And I just happen to want to do a standard crop. I can do a standard crop frame and then a few more panoramics and another standard crop. So you can do any mixture of standard and pano in any one roll of film. If I turn the camera on quickly, I can show you. So as you can see, there's actually film loaded in the camera at the moment. When the camera is set to panoramic mode, you have 21 frames on every roll of 36 exposure film. If I then move the switch on the back now to standard, now you can see we have the standard 36 frames. So when you move the preview lever, it automatically tells you how many frames you've got left in that format. So that's a really nice feature for users. While we're looking at the camera, let's just talk a bit more about the camera spec. I won't go into all the details, but I'll cover some of the basics. So on the top of the camera, the first thing I should probably point out before someone states the obvious, what have you done to your camera? First thing I should point out, which is not truly camera spec, is the paint finish on a Hasselblad Xpan is not the same level of workmanship as you'd get on a Leica M6, for example. So here's a Leica M6, almost without a blemish on it. And I do use it before someone says, yes, but that's because you keep it in a glass cabinet and polish it every day. I'm not a polisher type. And then the Xpan, you can just see the big chunks of paint missing. Now this isn't just me being rough with my cameras. It is a common problem with Hasselblad Xpans. The paint finish does tend to flake off. So with that point covered, back to the spec. So on the top plate of the camera, you can see we have shutter speeds from 8 seconds through to a maximum of 1/1000th of a second, and a flash sync speed of 1/125, which is more useful than a 1/50 for Leicas, as I keep banging on about in some of the other comparison videos. Despite it being a Hasselblad, unlike the Hasselblad, say 500cm or 501C that I've reviewed previously, those cameras use leaf shutter lenses, which basically means the shutter is in the lens itself. This is more like a Leica, where you've got the focal plane shutter on the inside the camera body, kind of on the back of the camera, so to speak. I can't open the camera because, as you just noticed, there is film inside, but it's a hinge back design, similar to the Bessa in the last video. Very easy to load. Now, one quirk with the Hasselblad Xpan compared to the majority of the cameras I own, normally you load your, if you can kind of picture it, you put in your new cassette here, you pull it across till the film leaders at the end, shut the back, press, and you're ready to take your first photo. If you happen to buy yourself a nice Hasselblad Xpan and then stumble across this video, don't be alarmed. You'll put your film in, shut the back, and then you'll hear a zzz whirring noise. And this camera is different in that the Xpan winds your film to the end. So it basically takes all your film from this side and puts it on this side. And then as you take your photo, it winds the photos back into the cassette. Now, some people may argue this is good because once the photo is back into the cassette cartridge, it's safe from light leaks. Whereas if all the film's on that side of the camera, if you open the back, you lose all your photos. So you could say that Hasselblad or Fujifilm were ahead of the game in this camera design, in that they are protecting the photos one by one as you take your photo. The only downside in kind of practice is you can't change your film mid-roll. If you shoot a lot of 35mm cameras, the same as myself, you might shoot, say, half a rolling I keep looking at it, M6 in front of me, and then switch out from black and white into colour. So I'd take it out halfway through. After, say, 15 photos, I'd mark the film 15 photos. For the black and white film, for example, put some colour film in, and then the next time I use that black and white film, I'll advance the film to 15 photos and then continue shooting. You cannot do that with a Hasselblad Xpan. The Hasselblad Xpan is much more automated than like M cameras. So you have auto film advance, auto film rewind, kind of from the motor drive. You have auto, electronic shutter, counter. You have an LCD display on the back. And then in terms of batteries, again, please excuse me for the scruffy labels that are still on the bottom of the camera. On the base of the camera, you have your slot to put your batteries, but this camera does not take the little cheap coin batteries, the LR44s that are in the M6 and many other film cameras. This camera is a bit more battery hungry because of the motor drive. I just put fresh ones in for this review so I can show you the old ones. You need 2 of these batteries. They're called CRV2 3-volt batteries. So without batteries, the Xpan won't run. You do actually have a battery indicator on the back of the camera so you know if your battery is running low, but it's always worth carrying a spare set. If you look through the viewfinder, you have a single frame line, and then depending on where the switch is, it'll either go to panoramic format or to standard format, which is kind of in the center. It's a nice kind of bright, clean viewfinder. And then at the bottom of the viewfinder, you have your LCD display with kind of your center-weighted light meter, center-weighted TTL light meter. For any of you guys that shoot aperture priority, this camera does have aperture priority mode. And then it's also got self-timer, single shot and continuous. In the center, you have obviously your hot shoe, and on the front of the camera, PC sync port. When it comes to film ISO, you have your ISO dial here. So at the moment it's set to 200, and there you see 200 displayed on the back of the camera. So if I now change it to 100 on the front, now on the back, it also reminds you that it is ISO 100. If you're using DX coded film, you can just set it to the DX coding. This is expired film, so it's 400 film that I will shoot at 100. The light meter, for anybody that's interested, you have a dot in the center, a negative and a positive. When the red dot's lighting up, that's when your exposure is correct based on the center weighted meter, what it thinks is correct. To open the back, by the way, there's a catch on the side. Pop that and the back will open. I don't want to open the back because, as I say, it's a full roll of film on the open side of the camera, so it would trash the whole roll. One feature I maybe should have pointed out, this is not an autofocus lens camera. So this is a fully manual focus lens, the same as you get on a Leica, Voigtlander, Zeiss, those type of cameras. And one feature I forgot to mention, it has a nice rubber grip around the body. The actual camera is made of a titanium aluminium chassis, but then it's rubber coated and there's like a nice grip on the front and a bit of a lump on the back. So it's nice to hold, it's a nice size. And talking of size, how does it compare next to a Leica? So you can hopefully see the Hasselblad Xpan is wider, very slightly taller, and maybe very slightly wider, but not much in it in terms of width. So fairly similar in terms of size-wise for me. In terms of weight, the Hasselblad weighs 590 grams, which may sound a lot, but for someone that's always talking about weights, this doesn't feel a heavy camera. For me, I feel like I've got a lot of firepower in a reasonably compact box, if that makes sense. Would you like to see some example Hasselblad Xpan pictures? I'll bring some up. Firstly, here are some portraits shot in standard format. So this is the same image sizes I'd get from a Leica M camera or Nikon SLR camera, any other 35mm film camera. And I normally use this format when the panoramic framing doesn't suit my subject. It's quite common for me that the pano format doesn't suit my model shots. But that said, you can obviously use the panoramic format for models as well. You just need to get a bit more creative and think about your compositions and your framing. So I was very fortunate to be asked to run a photography one-to-one workshop in New York. So I took the Hasselblad Xpan. New York is an absolutely ideal situation for using the Xpan because there's so much going on in such a small space. You really can capture more of kind of the life around the pictures. I'd say of all the places I've visited, New York is up there with the close to best place for using the Xpan for my experience. I did all the usual tourist shots and then I was really trying to think of what photos or what scenes would suit the panoramic format. And then my second trip, which really suited the Xpan, was when I took it on a family trip to San Francisco. I basically hired a bike, cycled around San Francisco in morning rush hour, kind of chopping in and out the traffic with the locals. and then catching some of the kind of the typical sunrise shots while I was in San Francisco. So happy that I took the camera on that trip, and I think it really suited the location. So I say one advantage of the Xpan is it makes you shoot differently. You kind of go out with a goal to look for panoramic scenes that will suit the camera format to shoot that particular frame. The same, I guess, if you go out with your 6x6 Hasselblad or whatever, you go out looking for square compositions. With the Xpan, you go out looking for pano compositions. I think it is quite refreshing if you're maybe in like a creative rut and you're shooting the same cameras all the time. So if you only ever shoot standard 35mm frame cameras, you're going to be so aware of what that particular frame is. If you then switch it up a bit and start shooting either pano 35mm, such as here, or for example medium format, and you're shooting, as I said, 6x6, it just keeps things fresh because you can get to exactly the same location, you can get your favorite tree or whatever you shoot, and the camera makes you shoot it differently because of the formatting of that camera. So I really like the Xpan for making me shoot differently and for getting that kind of cinematic looking scene, which I would argue is quite difficult to shoot on a standard 35mm frame. And then the opposite is also true. Depending on where you live, the panoramic framing may not suit your location or your day-to-day photography, which is extremely true for myself. I very rarely get the chance to use this camera because I'm not in the right place to make the most of this cropping. You might now be thinking, how much does the Xpan cost? Now, if you really have no clue how much these cameras cost, I'd probably recommend maybe pausing the video and sitting down before continuing. I don't want to cause anybody any injuries. Jokes aside, this is not a cheap camera. Prices have just pretty much gone vertical. The main reason is there's not a huge amount of these cameras made, so obviously a lot of demand because there is no competition. There's no other camera to my knowledge that can shoot 35mm pano shots in terms of 2 frames of 35mm rather than the fake panorama cameras, which is a kind of fake pano. So all that does is use your normal 35mm frame, and then it masks out the top and the bottom strips, showing you only the middle bit. So the final image is a panoramic image, but you're getting a tiny strip down the center of a normal 35mm negative, which is already small enough. With this, if you think, as I say, of a 6x6 negative, you're getting the whole strip, which is basically roughly 2 frames of 35mm side by side. That's a lot more real estate when it comes to scanning, so it not only offers you a higher resolution, but it also gives you a apparent shallower depth of field, because if you think you've got twice the width, so your 90mm f4 lens may act closer to perhaps a 90mm f2 lens, and you can actually get nice bokeh out of a 90 f4 Xpan lens. I can bring up an example to show you. But yes, back to the price. For any of you that think that the Leica M6 is expensive, which it obviously is, this is even more expensive. The Hasselblad Xpan with a lens, normally the 45mm lens just comes as a standard lens, £2,800 or $4,500. This seems to be the average prices when looking on eBay as at February 2021. So roughly 2,800 in Europe, and they seem to be listing mostly in Japan for around $4,500. Ouch, not cheap. If you do love the idea of shooting panoramic images and you want to get that higher amount of image resolution and you want to shoot film, maybe look at the panoramic adapters for some of the folding cameras, such as the Mamiya 6 panoramic adapter, the Mamiya 7 panoramic adapter, which I've already covered. If you already own those cameras, obviously if you've got to buy that camera and then buy the adapter, the price could get similar to just buying an Xpan. But if you already own those cameras, it's a small price to pay to be able to get Xpan type photos from your existing camera. And then if you want a poor man's Hasselblad Xpan, you just get any 35mm film camera and then crop the top and the bottom. You can either mask it out or you can crop it in post. I have played with this myself and it works particularly well with wide lenses for my taste. Here are a few photos, I think shot the Voigtlander Beta L, where I cropped it down to the Hasselblad Xpan formatting in Photoshop. I would highly recommend, if you're going to do this on standard 35mm film cameras, use the best film you can in terms of the highest resolving, finest grained film. Films like Kodak T-Max 400, for example, would probably be my choice if I want to shoot poor man panoramics on my Voigtlander Bessa L, as I mentioned in my example. Let us know below in the comments if you use a Hasselblad Xpan, and let me know if you think I gave the camera a fair overview in this video. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you like this type of content, feel free to subscribe. Lastly, as always, a massive thanks to my patrons. I'm back soon with another video. Bye.